Hi, this is John from Artistry in Glass, talking today about science, why it's important, and why it should not be denied. Now, if you like this video, please subscribe to my channel by clicking down below.
If we combine the ZZ and gamma gamma, this is what we get. They line up extremely well, and in the region of 125 GeV, they combine to give us a combined significance of 5 standard deviations.
Now, most scientific advances are communicated in scientific papers submitted to peer-reviewed journals, but occasionally the results are explained in meetings like the one you just saw at CERN in Switzerland. Those of you who have never been to such a meeting would probably be astonished by the modest and self-effacing demeanour of these scientists. Most remarks take the form of conditional statements like, "We think the results may indicate this," or "We're not sure right now, more work is needed." This type of remark, full of caveats, is characteristic of science. Now, just like any other large organization, there are occasional bad apples. In science, though, these are extremely rare, because scientists are ultimately searching for the truth, and if they come out with half-baked ideas and wild remarks and lies, they know they will be exposed and ridiculed by their peers and may even lose their job or lose tenure. Most scientists are not even motivated by fame and fortune. Listen to this world-famous physicist Richard Feynman talk about the Nobel Prize.
I don't need anything else. I don't think there's any sense to anything else. I don't see that it makes any point that someone in the Swedish Academy decides that this work is noble enough to receive a prize. I've already got the prize. The prize is the pleasure of finding the thing out, the kick in the discovery, the observation other people use it. Those are the real things. The honors are unreal to me.
So why is science important? Well, it should be obvious to everyone that science and technology are indispensable parts of the modern world. From internet to cell phones, from automobiles to airplanes, from vaccines to pharmaceuticals. But also, science-based decision-making is critical for solving the biggest challenges facing humankind, from asteroid impacts to nuclear proliferation, climate change to global pandemics. I'm going to give you an example of the importance of science from the world of business, and this is the famous Edmund Halley, who discovered the comet named after him. He was actually a contemporary and friend of the great Isaac Newton. Now, in the 1600s, the British government were losing their shirts selling annuities, and they asked Edmund Halley to figure out how to sell them properly. Working with the probability theory that had just been discovered by Pascal and Fermat, he found births and deaths records from a town called Breslau in Silesia. There, monks had carefully recorded these figures over hundreds of years from a population which largely lived and died in this small city. In an amazing breakthrough, Halley developed the first life tables, which are now used routinely to calculate the value of annuities and the cost of life insurance. Now, you'll see from this 1600 curve, tremendous number of deaths of juveniles. 35% of kids died before the age of 10. And here, by comparison, is a life curve from a current modern population. Now, the takeaway from this is that the simple application of science, in this case statistics, revolutionized the life insurance industry. Now, here's a similar curve, this time developed by a professor at Harvard University back in 1938. And here we have sensational early proof of the effects of smoking on life expectancy. You will see in this graph that 50% of heavy smokers were dead by the age of around 58. whereas 50% of non-smokers survive almost to the age of 70. Now, of course, this is the reason why these days, if you purchase a life insurance policy, your agent wishes to know whether you're a smoker or not. Now, on the subject of smoking, let's take a look at a famous video clip from the 1994 Senate hearings featuring the CEOs of big tobacco companies. By the way, all these CEOs are non-smokers.
Addictive. I heard virtually all of you touch on it. And just yes or no. Do you believe nicotine is not addictive?
I believe nicotine is not addictive, yes.
Mr. Johnston.
Congressman, cigarettes and nicotine clearly do not meet the classic definitions of addiction. There is no intoxication.
We'll take that as a no. And again, time is short. If you could just, I think each of you believe nicotine is not addictive. We just would like to have this for the record.
I don't believe that nicotine or our products are addictive.
I believe nicotine is not addictive.
I believe that nicotine is not addictive.
I believe that nicotine is not addictive.
And I too believe that nicotine is not addictive.
Now, the purpose of this talk is to try and explain why science is denied by so many people. And here we see the first reason. There's really no need to go into this in detail. You've just got to follow the money. But obviously greed is a great motivator for science denial. Now, I'd like to move on to the second crucial reason, which I've called ignorance. Now, obviously, ignorance begins with a lack of education in the school system. This is far too large a topic for this talk. So I'm going to discuss one of the issues, and that is that scientists are not by nature smooth PR specialists or slick TV personalities. They are themselves to blame for not educating the public sufficiently. To show you how confusion can arise, I'm going to give you two examples of scientific terms which are often totally misunderstood by the public. The first misunderstanding of terms is uncertainty, which is exemplified here in a well-known spaghetti map of projected hurricane tracks. Now, you will understand that the uncertainty here is not that the hurricane will or will not occur. It is merely that the location indicated by these models could be anywhere, let's say from Pensacola in the west to Wilmington in the east. This is a classic case of scientific uncertainty. And by the way, one of the strict no-nos in science is the falsification of data, as seen in this infamous Sharpie pen adjustment of the path of Hurricane Dorian. So we see that uncertainty in science refers to the idea that all data have a range of expected values, as opposed to a precise point value. Every scientific measurement has an uncertainty attached to it. In contrast, uncertainty is often interpreted by the public as ignorance. They lose confidence in any idea that is perceived as uncertain. Now let's take a look at a second misunderstood term, the word theory. The scientific meaning is that a theory is a well-substantiated explanation of an aspect of the natural world that can incorporate laws, hypotheses, and facts. Now, in contrast, the public perception is that a theory is just an untested hunch or guess without supporting evidence. In other words, the public will think, these guys don't even know what they're talking about, it's just a theory. So I'm going to try to explain to you what a scientific theory is by going back to my own scientific background as a geologist. What started off as the hypothesis of continental drift was an idea put forward by Alfred Wegener in 1912, when he noticed the remarkable coincidences in shape between the coastlines of South America and Africa. The problem here is that nobody could come up with a mechanism to move such large masses of rocks. So the idea was discounted until the 1950s and 60s. Now, when the continental shelf, here shown in blue, was mapped, the match was even more spectacularly accurate than previously thought. And then, crucially, research vessels from the Lamont Doherty Institute discovered what came to be known as a mid-ocean ridge, extending all the way down the central Atlantic. It was already well known that the Earth's magnetic field reverses every million years or so, and crucial evidence from sampling the Atlantic Ocean floor revealed the presence of strips of lava alternating between normal magnetic polarity and reversed magnetic polarity. Once these ocean floor basalts were dated, a wonderful global picture of oceanic spreading centers was revealed. Now, for any theory to be entirely successful, we need to know not just that it happens, but how it happens. We need a mechanism. And here you see the latest ideas. We have the thin, rigid oceanic plate here shown in grey, overlying the hotter and fluid upper mantle shown in orange. The latest hypothesis is that the oceanic plates move by a combination of forces. The cold, dense plate exerts slab pull, whereas the hot part of the plate sliding off the elevated mid-ocean ridge exerts ridge push. Now, the details of plate tectonic theory are not important. The idea is that understand that a theory becomes more and more likely as more and more evidence is discovered. Now, the third reason for a denial of science, I've included a number of psychological factors. First, I've called the power of human agency. Now, human beings would rather have an incorrect theory than no theory at all. So when we see ripples in a pond, we know that a rock pebble has been thrown into the water. In the same way, when our ancestors heard thunder, they naturally concluded that there was a powerful man in the heavens making this noise. This man became the pagan god Thor, whose name we still use for a day of the week. The need for an explanation, no matter how far-fetched, still persists today, and explains the popularity of conspiracy theories. Just to summarize a few from the current COVID-19 era, we have Chinese or US bioweapons, escaped or stolen from the research facility, a Muslim conspiracy, a Jewish plot to force mass vaccinations, that it's related to 5G mobile phone networks, that it was planned by Bill Gates and the Rockefellers. It's a population control scheme. Now, I've often noticed, both when I was a teacher and with employees, that very often those who know the very least believe they know the most. And this has been caused by psychologists, the Dunning-Kruger effect. That means that unskilled and unaware of it, how difficulties in recognizing one's own incompetence lead to inflated self-assessments. This identification derived from the criminal case of MacArthur Wheeler, who on April 19, 1995 robbed 2 banks while his face was covered with lemon juice, which he believed would make it invisible to the surveillance cameras. This belief was based on his misunderstanding of the chemical properties of lemon juice as an invisible ink. In view of time constraints, I'll have to overlook the many other psychological factors and jump to the final reason for the denial of science, and many people would say the most important one, and I've called it ideology. Anytime your ideas are controlled by a rigid totalitarian ideology enforcing its laws from the top down, like communism or fascism, then the process of scientific inquiry will always be compromised. However, in the 21st century, we have to concede that religion poses the most serious threat to science. Religion has fought a dogged rearguard action against science ever since the Enlightenment. This has been especially true of the Roman Catholic Church, which started the 17th century in style by executing Giordano Bruno, this Dominican friar who was burnt at the stake in Rome for supporting the Copernican heliocentric model of the solar system. The Vatican followed this up in 1633 by convicting and imprisoning Galileo Galilei, although of course they made up for this by issuing a full pardon in 1992. The Catholic Church has, by its own admission, committed many sins, but lately the more dangerous impediment to scientific progress has been the fundamentalist wing of the Protestant Church, represented here by Senator James Inhofe of Arkansas, who is demonstrating his inability to distinguish between weather and climate by brandishing a snowball on the Senate floor in an effort to deny the reality of climate change. Now, this seems amusing, but this is the scary part. If you believe, like Jim Inhofe, that the weather is controlled by a supernatural power in heaven, then it's quite obvious that lawmakers like him will have difficulty in passing any form of climate change legislation. Even more scary is the evangelical wing of the Protestant Church, represented by the late Jerry Falwell.
What we saw on Tuesday, as terrible as it is, could be minuscule if in fact God continues to lift the curtain and allow the enemies of America to give us probably what we deserve. We make God mad. I really believe that the pagans and the abortionists and the feminists and the gays and the lesbians who are actively trying to make that an alternative lifestyle, the ACLU, People for the American Way, all of them who tried to secularize America, I point the finger in their face and say, you helped this happen.
A significant number of evangelicals are getting ready to welcome the end times, when the faithful will be raptured into heaven and the rest of us will roast for eternity in hell. With this world view, how can they exercise responsible stewardship of our planet? How can they be concerned about the well-being of their grandchildren when their fervent hope is for the apocalypse? In summary, and for whatever of these reasons, scientists are currently facing their biggest ever challenge when a respected government doctor has to rely on bodyguards to protect himself and his family. AIDS denial, COVID-19 denial, climate change denial, evolution denial, flat earth support, genetically modified foods, anti-vaccinators, anti-statin, Holocaust deniers, moon landing deniers. These are, and others are, examples of anti-scientific thought and anti-intellectualism. Writer Isaac Asimov, speaking of this, said that there is a cult of ignorance in the United States, and there always has been. The strain of anti-intellectualism has been a constant thread winding its way through our political and cultural life, nurtured by the false notion that democracy means that my ignorance is just as good as your knowledge. Now, I'll finish with the science of climate change, because climate change, in most people's opinion, is one of the most devastating problems that humanity has ever faced, and the clock is running out. Here is an amazing fact. Exxon scientists correctly predicted future CO2 levels and global temperatures in a 1982 company report. Here are the actual data superimposed on Exxon's graph. You can see that in the year 2020, global temperatures have increased by 1 degree, exactly as predicted, and that CO2 levels have increased to 415 ppm, exactly as predicted by Exxon scientists in 1982. So let's hear from Rex Tillerson.
On Wednesday, Tillerson refused to answer questions about the oil giant's long history of denying the science of climate change, telling senators that scientific literature on climate change is, quote, inconclusive. Exposés by Insight Climate News and the Los Angeles Times have revealed Exxon knew that fossil fuels cause global warming as early as the 1970s, but hid that information from the public and instead poured millions of dollars into PR efforts aimed at sowing doubt over the science of climate change. Tillerson was asked about these reports by Virginia Democrat Tim Kaine.
Are these conclusions about ExxonMobil's history of promoting and funding climate science denial, despite its internal awareness of the reality of climate change during your tenure with the company, true or false?
Senator, since I'm no longer with ExxonMobil, I'm in no position to speak on their behalf. The question would have to be put to them.
And let me ask you, do you lack the knowledge to answer my question, or are you refusing to answer my question?
A little of both.
I have a hard time believing you lack the knowledge to answer my question.
Now, Exxon used exactly the same playbook as Big Tobacco to promote their climate change denial in the interest of corporate profits, even to the extent of using some of the same law firms. In particular, they raised doubts about even the most indisputable scientific evidence. They funded an array of front organisations to create the appearance of a broad platform for a tight-knit group of vocal climate change contrarians who misrepresented peer-reviewed scientific findings. They attempted to portray its opposition to action as a positive quest for sound science rather than business self-interest. Now, my great hope is that I can persuade those of you who have been deceived by the tactics of big oil to see the errors that you've made. And so I'll just finish by summarising the arguments for climate change. When burnt, fossil fuels all release carbon dioxide, which acts like a blanket around the Earth. As the amount of CO2 rises, the planet warms up. Sea levels rise, and extreme weather becomes more commonplace. A whole range of impacts, from wildfires to flooding to extreme heat and drought, become more common and more severe. Here is an example of climate change as it applies to forest fires. Rising temperatures mean that snow melts sooner. Forests are drier for longer, and fires are getting worse. This map shows the California Camp Fire of 2018. It was as large as the size of Metro Chicago. So it seems that when it comes to climate change denial, we have a perfect storm of factors. Greed by the energy companies unwilling to give up their profits, ignorance by the general public, and psychological factors where, amongst other things, we are unwilling or too selfish to sacrifice small short-term inconveniences for the sake of our grandchildren. And finally, ideologies where irrational ideas combat the logic of science. Change is still possible. Science suggests that we can avoid the worst impacts of climate change if we limit warming to under 2 degrees centigrade, and to do this we need a much cleaner economy by mid-century. Fossil fuel companies need to stop preventing climate change action, and leaders in the US need to act, and you can help.